Okay, well, in this video I'm going to be doing a walkthrough of the pattern machine project from the software development class. You can find a blank copy of it in the Replit Teams site. Go to Teams and then go to our class. And then down here at the bottom you can find a copy of it that's starter code. And then if you open that up, you'll see an opening website that doesn't really have much on it. If I run it, you can see that it just displays hello world. And it's got a script file that doesn't have anything in it, and it has a style file that has some basic stuff that just makes the whole page, makes the web page fill the entire screen of the user. So first thing I'm going to do to get started on this is I'm going to open it up using the Open a New tab so that I can see the output of the page like this. And if I reload that, it should say hello world. And then I'm going to open up the developer tools, which in Firefox you open up this thing and you go to more tools and then open the web developer tools. You can also get straight there with Shift Control I. And that opens up this little tab on the bottom. If you're using Chrome, that might be on the side or it might look a little bit different. It gives us ways to inspect what's going on the web page and to find out why there's errors, if there are any errors, and to understand how the page is laid out. So I'm going to open this up to the console, and then we'll look at that in a little bit to see information about how the web page is doing, and it'll tell us what errors we're making when we make typos, which we will definitely make some. Okay, so I'm going to go back over here, and on my editor view, I'm going to make this a little bit smaller, so I've got more space. I'm going to make that a little bit bigger so I can still see my file browser, but I mainly want to be able to see this page. I'm going to make that just a little bit bigger, hoping that you can see it clearly on your screen. Okay, so the project is to make a pattern machine. It's going to make a grid of boxes, and when you click on the boxes, they will change colors, and you can make patterns out of all those boxes. So the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of that hello world part. And then I'm going to change the title of the page to pattern machine. And then I'm going to come back over here to this other tab and reload. And there we go. I now see the title has changed to pattern machine, and that hello world went away. And now I see an error message down here in the console. It says get https something 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 favicon.ico not found. And that's that lots of web pages make a little image that shows up here in the address bar when you load the page. I didn't make one. So when this page, when the page loads, the browser checks to see if that file exists, and if it doesn't, it tells you it's missing. But it's not really an error that stops the page from working. It just is letting us know that it's not there. Okay, so there's going to be a grid of boxes, and we're going to set them up on the page, and we want the user to be able to select how many of them they want to have, like how many rows and how many columns. So the first thing I'm going to do is in this index.html page, I'm going to set up placeholders for those things. So here inside the body, I'm going to make a div id equals quotes select size, and then bracket /div. So a div is a divider on the page that is a holding place for other stuff. And I give it an ID so that I can use the program in the JavaScript to be able to refer to it and to get information back out of whatever's there, or to change the information that's there. And then I'm going to put two things inside that div. One is an input box whose type equals number, whose ID is rows, whose value is 10, and whose minimum value is 1. And then I close that bracket. Let's go see what that does over on the web page. So if I come over here and load it, I now see a box that's got the number 10 in it. So that's that starting value that I set of 10. That makes that show up there. The minimum value is 1, so it shouldn't go below 1. So it won't let it go be fewer than 1 row. And there's no maximum. It just goes up. Okay. So there's a div on the page that contains that selection box. Okay. And I'm going to click on the inspector so I can see what's going on there. Let me make this a little bit bigger so we can see that better. And you can see in the inspector there's kind of like a copy of the HTML file. And as I hover over parts of it, it shows me up on the web page which part of the page that code corresponds to. So the body is making the entire page turn blue, and then that div is making this row right there turn blue. So that div includes that selection box, that input box, and everything else along that line. And then if I click on the little triangle there, I can open this up and see the things that are inside that div, and it highlights just that input box. So that's cool. Okay, so that's the box for inputting the number of rows. I needed a second one to input the number of columns. So you should pause here for a moment and make a copy of this input line and then change it to make a second one that corresponds to the number of columns that we're going to have. We'll just pause. Okay, well hopefully you made a copy of this line. Just like that. And everything in it is the same except for the word rows there. I don't want the ID to be rows, I want the ID to be columns. And then let's go back over here to the output, reload the page with Control R or the reload button. And now I can see two boxes, both of which start at 10, and I can change them. They've got a minimum value of 1. Awesome. Okay, and I can see in this inspector that it's showing me which parts of the page that is. And if I check over on the console, there's no error messages other than that one that we already had about the fav icon not existing. Okay, well, at the moment, nothing happens when I put those numbers in. Nothing else changes. So I need to make a way for the program that controls what's happening on the web page to know that those numbers have been changed and to do something with them. So I'm going to make a submit button so that you can choose the numbers and then hit submit, and it's going to update the page. So I'm going to make one more line here. Input type equals submit now. So it's a button whose purpose isn't to write numbers in it. It's a button whose purpose is to submit things. And then I'm going to give it an ID of submit button. And a value. The value is going to be the text that shows up on the button. I'm going to put in the words apply the grid size. And you could put something else that makes sense there. Let me go back over here and we'll see what that does. Reload. There we go. Now we've got the input box, and this button. And if I click on that button, it kind of highlights, but nothing else changes because there's still nothing hooked up to it to make it do anything. Okay. So the next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to make a place on the page that's going to hold the rows and columns of the grid of boxes. So I'm going to make another div/div pair like this one. And I want it to be outside of the select size one because it's a separate thing. So up on the page, I want to have this row with this input, and then I want to have something below it that includes the thing that I'm making. So I want it to be outside of that div. So let me hit a couple of enters there and do another div/div pair. So another division on the page. And I'm going to give that one an ID of grid, and that's it. Nothing else goes inside there, at least at the moment, because what's going to show up there is going to be something that changes based on the user of the web page deciding how many rows and columns they want. So I can't just write that part ahead of time and have it correctly update itself. In order to do that interaction, I need something that's going to show up in the JavaScript file. Okay, so to build that interaction, I'm going to go to the JavaScript file, and the first thing I need is variables that exist inside the program that access the values that are on the web page. So the web page itself is defined in the HTML, and that defines what's on the page and the names of all those things. But in order to interact with them, I need something that has access to those items. So I'm going to put in a couple of lines here that you can just follow along with. Const, that stands for constant, rows equals document.get element by ID, quote, rows. And it's got to be exactly like that. If you have the capitalization different than mine, if you have typos, you'll get error messages. Or you won't get error messages, but things won't behave quite the way you expect them to. So I need a variable that points to this box right here, so that I have a way inside the program of finding out what number the user put in there. And then I need another one, just like it, for the columns. Const columns equals document.get element by ID columns. And then I need a third one of those that points to the submit button so that I know whether somebody clicked on it or not. So const submit equals document.get element by ID quotes submit button. Okay, let's go over to the web page, and the thing that's making the script happen is, here at the bottom of the HTML file. After the page is fully loaded, it then loads this script and does whatever is inside it. Okay, so let's go see what this does over here. Reload the page, and I don't see any difference. I don't see any error messages. I don't see any difference here. There's really nothing apparent that's different about it. But if I type in the console here, let's say button, that variable name, what did I call it? Not button, submit. There's now a variable that has access to that HTML element that is that thing on the page. And then I can also type rows, and that points to that one, and columns, and that points to that one. So the program has access to those things that are on the page. And if I type in something that is not that, it tells me I don't know what that is. That's not defined. Okay, so now what? There's one more variable that I need to have access to because I need to have a way of putting things into that grid. So I need one more const grid equals document.get element by ID grid. Okay, now I've got variables inside the program that point to all the things. And I'm now going to add two more bits. So we start to actually have some interaction happening. I'm going to make a function called makeGrid. You define the function body with the word function, the name of the function, well, whatever you want to call it, the parentheses, and then the curly braces. And then whenever I say the name of that function somewhere else in the program, it will do whatever is in between that curly brace and that curly brace. So I'm just going to leave it like that for right now. And then I'm going to add an event listener. An event listener is a bit of code that tells the web page you need to pay attention to whenever the user is doing something. And there's a bunch of different things that the web page can listen for, actions the user can do. The one that we use most often, or that I'm using most often, is click. So if somebody clicks on something, specifically if they click on the submit button, this tells it what to do. And the thing it should do is call the function makeGrid. So let me just prove that something has happened. Somebody clicked the button. So let's go back over here to the web page, load it. I see nothing different on the page, but if I click apply the grid size now, I get a little message down here, somebody clicked the button. So the console is not something the user of the web page is typically going to see, but it's really nice for us as the programmer to be able to send messages to ourselves saying, yeah, that part worked. If I had done all of this and then clicked the button and I didn't see that somebody clicked the button message, then I would know I made a mistake someplace. Like I made a typo, I didn't call the function correctly, I didn't do the action that I thought I had. So let me show you a way that can happen. Let's say I change that to like mistype makeGrid, makeGrid. Let's reload the page and see what happens. Oh, before I even get to the point of clicking on the button, it sends me an error message saying, uncaught reference error, makeGrid is not defined. So it noticed that I tried to call a function that didn't exist, or that I was going to try to call a function that doesn't exist, and it tells me that. Well, that's very helpful. So let me not make that same mistake. What if I mistype the word click to say clicks? I don't know. Maybe I thought that's what it's called. I go over here and load. Okay, I don't see any difference here. The only error message is that favicon thing. And then I click on the button and nothing shows up. Even though I was expecting that the makeGrid action would happen and it would tell me somebody clicked the button. That didn't happen, so I must have made a mistake, and it's because I used the wrong word here. Click. Okay, so our next task is we're going to start adding things into this makeGrid function so that it actually builds something on the page. So to get the makeGrid function to actually start building something on the page, I need one, to know how many rows and columns that I'm supposed to make. So I'm going to figure out what numbers are written inside those boxes now. That might seem silly, like you just know what the numbers are, but the program doesn't. The program has to be told, go look in those boxes and find out what number is written there. So I'm going to make a variable, let num rows equal rows dot value. So that's figuring out what value is written on rows right now and then storing it in a different variable. Let's do the same thing for the columns. Let num columns equal columns dot value. And the reason I'm naming the variables like this, num for number of rows and number of columns, is it kind of reminds me that what's stored there is a number, and I'm using it like in the way that I use numbers, where rows is an HTML element that's got stuff in it. And this style of defining variable names and function names, where the first letter is lowercase, and then compound words, the second and third word get capitalized, is a really common pattern that JavaScript programmers expect. So when they look at your code, it's much easier for them to see what you're doing if you follow that same convention. But you got to be careful to do it exactly the same every time. Okay, so then let me do a quick test to make sure that I've correctly gotten the right numbers off of the page. So I'm going to do a console.log of num So let me have it type out the number of rows and the number of columns, like that. And then let's go over to the web page and see whether that worked. So reload it, put numbers in there, 9 rows, 11 columns, apply the grid size, and it says somebody click the button, but I did not get a message about how many. Okay, so something didn't work there. Let's see if we can figure out what that is. Okay, I'm a little confused here. Okay, so I had a bug for a moment there, and I actually paused while I was recording to track down what was going on. I usually try to show you the process, but it was confusing. And the reason was that there was a weird thing with the Replit site where it wasn't, it hadn't updated quite to this line, and so it wasn't including the console.log that printed out those results, and that's why I wasn't seeing anything on the web page. So let me show it to you now. If I reload and then apply that grid size, I now see somebody click the button and 9 rows, 11 columns. And if I change this to some other values and do it again, I see somebody click the button, 4 rows, 17 columns. And 41 rows and 2 columns. 41 rows and 2 columns. So that's all working as expected now, and I didn't actually change anything about the program. I just waited a minute and then it started to work. Hopefully you won't run into that particular issue, because that would be pretty hard to track down. Okay, so now we know that clicking the button works and we've gotten access to those numbers. Let's actually put something on the page based on that input. So first thing I'm going to do is grid.innerHTML equals a pair of quotes with nothing inside them. I'm going to put a comment next to that to explain what that line is doing. That line is going to clear the grid whenever somebody clicks that update button, so that we start fresh each time. If I didn't do that, I would end up having rows kind of like building on top of each other over time, and it would get confusing to keep track of what it's doing. So if I reload and then, oops, I open an extra tab, reload, and then apply that grid size, nothing seems to have happened. And over on the inspector, I don't really see anything different here either. This is just like clearing it so that we can get started. Okay. So now we're going to have the program make a new div on the page to hold the rows. So let me make a comment here. Make a new div to hold a row. I'm going to say let row div equal document dot create element. So I'm creating an element on the page. The type of that element is div. And then I'm going to tell the HTML that the class of that item is row. This is going to allow me to control what it looks like. And then row div dot set attribute ID. So I'm going to give it an ID of row 0. And then last, grid dot append child row div. That probably sounds really funny to say append child. The way the HTML is structured, let me go back and look at over here on the HTML page. The elements inside the page contain other elements. So the body is like the parent of a bunch of other things on the page. And this div that we made called select size is one of the children of body. And then these 3 input elements that are inside select size are children of the select size parent. And they're also siblings of each other. And then there's the grid, which doesn't have anything in it at the moment, but over here on the script, we're adding something inside that grid that is going to be a child of the grid. So that element is going to be have type row. Its ID is row 0. Let's see if that worked. Let's go load the page. And let me look inside, inspecting the element here. There's nothing inside there right now. But if I now click that, something appears inside that grid that is a child of the grid. There's nothing inside that, nothing in between those two tags, but I can see applying that grid size adds new things in there. So then the next thing we want to do is we want to add a cell inside that row. We actually want to add a bunch of them, but we'll do it one at a time. So make a new div to hold the row. Next, we're going to make a new cell inside the row. So it's going to look very similar to what we just wrote. We're going to make a new div, and we're going to append it onto the row. I'm going to say let cell equal document dot create element div. So I'm making a new div inside. I'm going to give it a class of cell. I'm going to set some attributes so that I can control what it looks like and get access to it. It has an ID of cell 00. So those numbers, the first number is going to be which row it's in, so it's in row 0, and which column it's in is column 0. So it's the very first, the top left one. And then cell dot set attribute. I'm going to give it a color to begin with. Let's just say yellow. And finally, I'm going to add it onto that row div. Row div dot append child cell. All right, let's see what happens. Go over here to the web page, reload, inspect inside the element and see there's nothing inside the grid right now. I click the button, and now there's something inside the grid. And if I open that up, there's something inside the row. I still can't actually see anything on the page, though. The code has something in it, but I can't see it, and it doesn't actually have a color either. So I got to figure out how to make that show up. And for that, we're finally going to add some things to the CSS file so that we can see it. So this is why I made those, I attached those class names. So I'm going to select all the things whose class is cell and give them some properties. I want to make them not too big and not too small. So I'm going to set a maximum height and maximum width. I'm going to make them change size if the window changes size. So I'm going to set a percentage that I want them to be 5% of the whole width of the screen. This one for the aspect ratio, we'll try to keep them square. And I want them to not get too small. And let's give it a background color of yellow. And give it a border. and make that border have some width. So let's see what happens there. If I reload that and then apply the grid size, aha, now I've actually got a box showing up there, and it's got some properties. Okay, so I'm not going to do anything with the style for the row yet until I kind of see what happens when I start adding more cells in there. So let me put that there. We're going to control some things about the properties of the row as well, but we're not going to do it yet. Okay, so then I'm going to go back to the script file, and I want to make more than one cell. There. So this make new div to hold a row gives me a row, but there's supposed to be more than one cell that goes there. And basically I want to repeat this same sequence of steps a bunch of times. I want to make a cell, I want to give it a class name, I want to append it onto the row. I just want to keep doing that over and over again. So let's do that. So I'll make a loop like we've used in the Carol programs and stuff. So for let j less than equals 0, j less than number of columns, j plus plus. So that's going to make everything inside the curly braces repeat as many times as there are columns. And the thing I want to have repeat is all of that. And let me select this and tab it over. And now we can see all of that stuff will get repeated a bunch of times. But I don't want all of the cells to have the same ID. That will be confusing. At the moment, they're all in the first row, so the cell 0 part is correct, but I want to add on which column number we're on. And then let's see what happens if I run that. So go back over here to the page, reload, 41 rows, 2 columns, so I should see 2 boxes. Ah, I do see 2 boxes, but they're on top of each other. What happens if I make 5 boxes? Ah, I see 5 boxes and they're on top of each other. I want those to be horizontal, so I got to do some stuff to make them lay out horizontally. That actually is why I'm going to have to make some properties show up on the row. So let's go back over the style file. And it's actually the properties of the container that determine whether it lays out vertically or horizontally. So I want to set the max, not the width, the maximum height of each row to still be 100 pixels, and the minimum height to be 20 pixels. And I want the height now to be 5% of the height of the whole screen. This is the part that makes it's going to make it lay out horizontally. It's called display flex. And then justify content, center it. All of these different CSS properties are pretty confusing, and we'll learn more about them over time, but for the moment what this does is allow it to lay itself out horizontally. So reload the page, 41 rows, 5 columns, apply it. There we go. I've got 5 across, and they're laid out nice. I actually want them to have a little bit of space in between them, so I'm going to set some margins there too. I want to give it a little bit of space before each one of 10 pixels, and some space. No, that's good. Reload that, and cool. All right. Now I've got my 5 columns, and if I change this different values, it lays them out nice for whatever number I want. And at some point, if it fills up the screen too much, it'll start doing funny things. Like they'll get way too small or their shape will change. But for reasonable values, this works pretty well. So I think actually the next thing I want to do is I want to figure out the color changing part of it so we can kind of see what the interaction is really going to look like here. So I'm going to move this back down to just 1. And we're going to make the color changing work with just one cell on the screen. And then we're going to apply that to all of them once it builds more. Let me change this to 1 by 1 so that this reflects what we're doing. And then I'm going to go back to the script, and I want to build another interaction that occurs when somebody clicks on that box. I want to click on it and have something happen. So as soon as that cell gets made, and after it's been appended onto the page, I want to make another event listener, like the one that we attached up here to the submit button, that's listening for people clicking. So cell.add event listener click, just like that previous one. But now it's going to call a different function, one that changes the color. And then, let me show you what happens if I run that. Run, apply the grid size. Let's look at the console. There's already an error message because change color is not defined. So clicking on it won't do anything because I need to make that function. So to make that function, I'm going to go below here and make sure that you're outside of the definition of the function for makeGrid. So for my line numbers, makeGrid starts at line 9 and goes all the way down to line 33. So I'm going to go below that and start making a new function. Function change color. The parentheses, the curly braces, a couple of enters. But this time, I got to write a word inside the parentheses in the definition of change color, because the function needs to know which button, which cell got clicked on in order for it to be able to change its color. So I'm going to, just as a way of testing to make sure that we're working so far, hit console.log event so we can see what happens. So let me run the page, no error message, apply the grid size. Somebody click that button. There's one row and one column. Click this one, and it prints out a bunch of stuff about the thing that I clicked on. And if you open that up in the console, you see there's a lot of stuff there. So that box has a lot of properties, most of which we don't really need to worry about. But I can definitely tell that it's working. Let me show you what happens if I have two of them there. And then I click on the left one. Okay, it printed something out. I click on the right one. It prints out a different thing, and you can see it's got a different ID. The first one's got the ID 00. The second one's got the ID 01. If I make 3 columns, click on each one, I can see it's cell 00, cell 01, cell 02. So that sending in that variable name of the event allows the function to know who got clicked on. And that's how we're going to figure out what we should do in order to change the color. Okay, I'm going to have to make a couple of changes to the rest of the program to be able to make the color changing work. Because what I want is for it to kind of like cycle through colors. I want it to start on one color. I'll click on it. It'll change to another color. Click again. It'll change to a third color. And then if I click on it again, I want it to change back to the first one. I want it to kind of like cycle through colors. So I'm going to way up here at the top, underneath my grid, make a line that is about the colors. Const colors equals curly braces 1 colon. This is going to look kind of opaque. Number FF0000. And then 2 colon quotes number 00FF00. And then finally 3 colon number 0000FF. So these are codes for the 3 different colors. And it's basically a red, a green, and a blue. And I'm going to use this to cycle through. And then I'm going to go back to the moment where I created the cell. And instead of making its color be the name yellow, I'm going to make its color be the number 1. So it's going to take the first element out of that list of colors that I made. And then I'm going to add one more line here, cell.style.background color equals colors bracket 1. So that right there is going to give me a way to access the property of the cell and change it kind of on the fly. And then making this definition up here at the top of the program allows me to decide, like, maybe I don't like the red, the green, and the blue that I picked, and later I want to change the color scheme. I only need to change it in one place. I don't need to change anything anywhere else in the program. I did forget the semicolon there, though. So let me run. And okay, now they're all red. And I click them, and no colors are changing yet, but I know how to access each one. Let me go back down to the one by one. Okay. So then I'm going to come back down to my change color function, and I'm going to say, well, somebody clicked on the cell. That means I must want to change its color. I'm going to figure out which one we're talking about. Let cell equal event.target. So that's the cell that was clicked on. Let color number equal number cell.get attribute color. So that's going to figure out what color label is on that cell right now so that it can change it to the next one in the list. It's going to add 1 to that number so that it goes from 1 to 2 and 2 to 3. And then if I've gone past 3, I want it to reset back down to 1 again. So I'm going to check to see if the color number is now bigger than 3. Make it cycle back down to 1. Color number equals 1. And then I need to actually change the color. So I want to say cell.style.background color equals colors, drawing from that list, color number. And finally, one last thing, cell.set attribute, the word color, and color number. Okay, I think that's all going to work. Let's go check it. This line is actually changing the color of the box. This line is changing the label that's on it, so that when we come back again, we can keep updating that color. So reload, apply the grid, click on the button, the red turns to green. Click on it again, the green turns to blue, Click on it a third time, the green turns back to red. And it just cycles through. Awesome. And then if I put more grids, more cells in the row, every one of them changes separately from whatever its current value is to the next one. And if I click that reply the grid size again, it resets back to the starting state. So I can make patterns out of this, doing every other one, and then do like every third one. So you kind of get the idea of where we're going with this. It's almost like the way a screen works. You've got a bunch of pixels that you can change the colors of. Okay, but next for us is to make all the rest of the rows. And at the moment, we've only got one row, even though it has 6. So I want you to come back over here and think about what is it you need to do in the make grid function so that you get more rows out of it. So to do that, just like we made a loop in order to create a bunch of cells within one row, we're going to make another loop to make a bunch of rows that includes all of that. So this sequence of steps happens repeatedly in order to make each of the cells, and this loop wraps around all of that to make it happen the right number of times. Okay, well, to make the row, you need to have 2 things happen. You need to create the empty row right here, and then you need to create the filled row with that part. So it's really everything from there to there that needs to happen in order to make multiple rows. So that all of that happened to make one row. So I'm going to make a loop around all of that to make multiple rows. So let's make a new loop for let I equal 0, I less than the number of rows, I plus plus, curly brace, and then let me take that whole thing that needs to be inside there and tab it. So it gets indented, and that helps me to see all of this is the stuff that's supposed to get repeated. And then I need one more curly brace to match up with that first one so I can see everything there is the stuff that's getting repeated. And then we're just almost there. I don't want them all to have the same ID. It's not row 0 every time. It's row I each time. And then the cells are not all cell 0. They're all cell I plus j. And that's actually really all I need to change in order to make it do multiple rows. Let's try that out and see if I forgot anything. Come over here, run. Okay, I should see 6 rows of 8. Boom. 6 rows of 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Nothing else. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And let's see, I didn't change anything else about the change color function, but I think it's still going to work exactly right for all of the rows. You can kind of see what I'm talking about patterns here. Like that. Okay, so actually, I'm mostly done. I just need to, I want it to be a little more symmetrical. So I'm going to add some more spacing between the rows to make that look nicer. And then I also just want to test to see what happens if I have tons of them. So if I have lots and lots of rows, they all work just fine. If I have lots and lots of columns, they get smaller in order to fit in. And if I resize the screen, they change size to match. Let me make that more reasonable. Nice. And if I resize that screen, they get smaller because I use that percentage to make them show up the right size. Okay, so I'm just going to add one little thing to make the bottom margin match up so it looks a little more square. That's over in the style file. I made the left margin be 10 pixels. I want the bottom margin to also be 10 pixels. Let's see how that looks. Reload, apply. Ah, yeah, like that. Make that a little bigger. Yeah, that looks good. And that's basically the tool that I want. And I can make cool little patterns. So there's one more complexity that I actually want to add to it, just because it gets a little bit old to click on each individual one, although I think this is a pretty good toy as it is. I would like to be able to hold the button down and then drag across and then change the entire row all at once. And that's going to require a couple of changes to be able to accommodate it. The main one is I need to add another event listener. So I need to listen for two kinds of events inside the script: clicking and also mouse over. Cell.add event listener mouse over. That event is whenever the mouse is on top of one of the cells, it'll change color. Let me just change that. Reload, apply the grid size, and then as the mouse passes over, I'm not clicking now. They're all changing at once. That's pretty cool. So now I missed that one. And I can also stop and click on each one. So the one problem with this is that, like, if I get into the middle and I don't want to change anything else, it's a little difficult to get off because it'll change everything on the way. I would have to like pass over the white part somehow very carefully, which is hard to do. So I want to add that you have to be holding the button down and moving across in order to do that drag function. So I'm going to add a little test down here in the change color function so that it checks to make sure whether I'm mousing over with the button pressed or whether I'm just pressing the button. So to do that, I'm going to check if the event type is click, then it should change the color. Or if the event.type is a mouse over and the left mouse button is being pressed down, event.buttons equals 1, then it should do all this stuff. So then I put curly braces. Everything after this is included in what gets executed, if that's true, and then I put another curly brace there. So it's saying if I've clicked, or this is a double pipe symbol or vertical bar. It's the key right above the enter key on your keyboard with a shift. And those are two ampersands. This one means or, this one means and. So if the type is click, or if the type is mouse over and I'm pressing the left button, then change the color of everything. So let's go back over here, reload it, apply the grid size, and now if I mouse over, you see it's firing the event, but it's not changing the color. So it goes into the change color function, and then finds I didn't click the way I was supposed to. But if I click, it changes the color. And if I drag and hold the mouse button down, it changes the color. And sometimes it misses some if I go a little bit fast. There's some issues with dragging like not quite working right, but this is basically the whole thing that I want. Okay, you have built a pattern machine. If you want to add other features to it or talk to me about how to make improvements to it, then we can do that. I think that's good for now, though. So work on that. Let me know if you have any problems, and I'll talk to you in class.